The dust swirled around her tattered skirt as Katherine Oakes sat with her back against the rough wooden wall of the Lucky Strike Saloon, her trembling hand extended toward anyone who might spare a glance. The year was 1872, and Fort Yuma, Arizona Territory, showed no mercy to those who had fallen on hard times. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dirt streets as miners, cowboys, and drifters passed by without acknowledgement, their boots kicking up clouds that settled on her already dirt-streaked face. She had been sitting in that same spot for 3 days now, ever since the stagecoach company had left her stranded after she could not pay the remainder of her fare from Missouri. Her father had died 2 months prior, leaving her with nothing but debts and a ticket west that promised a teaching position in California, a position she would never reach now. Katherine's stomach growled painfully as she watched a man in fine clothes exit the saloon, the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread wafting out behind him. She opened her mouth to ask for help, but the words caught in her throat when he deliberately turned his face away. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over the past weeks, mourning her father, losing their small farm to creditors, and watching her dreams crumble like dried clay. Now she just felt hollow, wondering if she would survive another night in the desert cold without proper shelter or food. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, when she heard the distinctive jingle of spurs approaching. Katherine kept her eyes down, too weary to face another rejection. The boots that stopped in front of her were worn but well-maintained, covered in trail dust. She slowly raised her gaze, taking in long legs clad in denim, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and finally a face that made her breath catch despite her desperate circumstances. Vincent Dalton stood well over 6 feet tall, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of sage in summer. His dark hair curled slightly at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his strong jaw. But it was not his handsome features that struck Katherine most. It was the expression in his eyes when he looked at her. There was no disgust, no dismissal, only a deep concern that seemed to reach right into her chest and squeeze her heart. "Miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried the accent of someone who had spent their life under open skies. "How long have you been sitting here?" Katherine swallowed hard, her throat dry as parchment. 3 days, sir. I am sorry to be a bother. I just need enough for some bread if you can spare anything." Vincent's expression darkened, but she sensed the anger was not directed at her. He crouched down so they were at eye level and she could see the genuine kindness in his face. 3 days. Has no one offered you help? People have their own troubles, she whispered. I understand. That is no excuse, he said firmly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some coins, but instead of dropping them into her palm, he stood and offered her his hand. Come with me. You need food and water, and you need them now. Katherine stared at his outstretched hand, weathered and calloused from hard work, and felt a flutter of something she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the basic human longing for kindness. She placed her trembling fingers in his, and his hand closed around hers with surprising gentleness. He pulled her to her feet easily, though she swayed slightly from hunger and exhaustion. When did you last eat? Vincent asked, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Yesterday morning. A woman gave me an apple core. His jaw tightened. An apple core. He shook his head and guided her away from the saloon. We are getting you a proper meal right now. I cannot pay you back, Katherine protested weakly as he led her down the street. I have nothing. Did I ask you to pay me back? Vincent's tone was kind but firm. What is your name? Katherine Oakes. Miss Oakes, I am Vincent Dalton. I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here. I came into town for supplies, and I am grateful I did." They reached a small restaurant called Martha's Dining Room, and Vincent held the door open for her. The interior was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the delicious smell of home cooking. Katherine felt acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance as the few patrons looked up, but Vincent seemed not to notice or care. He guided her to a corner table and pulled out a chair. "Martha," he called to the stout woman behind the counter, "bring us 2 full dinners, whatever you have that is hot and ready, and water, please." Martha's sharp eyes took in Katherine's condition, and her expression softened. "Coming right up, Vincent." As they waited, Vincent removed his hat and set it on the empty chair beside him. His dark hair was slightly flattened where the hat had been, and Katherine found herself noticing details she had no business noticing. The strong line of his neck, the way his fingers drummed thoughtfully on the table, the concern that still lingered in his eyes when he looked at her. "Will you tell me how you came to be outside the saloon?" he asked gently. "You do not have to if you would rather not." Something about his sincerity made the words spill out. Katherine told him about her father's death, the farm they lost, the teaching position in California that had seemed like salvation. She explained how the stagecoach line had promised to let her work off part of her fare by helping with luggage at the stations. But the manager in Fort Yuma had changed his mind and demanded immediate payment she did not have. "They took my traveling bag for the debt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I had left was in that bag. My mother's Bible, the reference letters for the teaching position, a photograph of my parents, all gone." Vincent's hands had clenched into fists on the table as she spoke, but his voice remained calm. "What was the manager's name?" "It does not matter now. I just need to find work, any work, so I can save enough to continue to California." Martha arrived with 2 plates piled high with pot roast, potatoes, carrots, and thick slices of bread. Katherine's eyes widened at the sight, and her stomach cramped with desperate hunger. Vincent noticed her hesitation. "Please, eat as much as you want," he said, picking up his own fork to put her at ease. Katherine ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some dignity, but hunger soon overtook manners. The food was simple but delicious, and she could not remember anything tasting better. Vincent ate his own meal without comment, occasionally refilling her water glass when it emptied. His quiet presence felt like a shelter from a storm, and Katherine found herself stealing glances at him between bites. When she finally pushed back from her empty plate, feeling more human than she had in days, Vincent was watching her with a thoughtful expression. "Miss Oakes, I have a proposition for you," he said. "My ranch is struggling. My wife passed away 2 years ago from fever, and I have been trying to manage everything alone, the house, the books, the cooking. I have 3 ranch hands who help with the cattle and horses, but I need someone to help with the domestic side of things. I could offer you room, board, and wages. It would not be much at first, but it would be honest work and a roof over your head." Katherine's heart began to race. The offer seemed too good to be true, and her natural caution warred with her desperate need. "Sir, I appreciate your kindness more than I can say, but why would you offer this to a stranger? You know nothing about me. I know you have been sitting outside that saloon for 3 days, begging for scraps, and you still said please and thank you," Vincent replied. "I know you lost your father and your home, but were still trying to make your own way west to work. That tells me plenty about your character. As for why I am offering, I need the help and you need the work. It seems straightforward to me. What will people say? A woman living on your ranch. The ranch hands stay in the bunkhouse, and there is a separate cottage that was meant for a foreman I never hired. You would have your own space. Anyone who wants to gossip can take it up with me." His expression made it clear what he thought of gossips. Katherine studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motives. She had heard stories of men who preyed on desperate women, making promises they never intended to keep. But Vincent's gaze was steady and honest, and something in her gut told her he was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man trying to do a decent thing. "I know how to keep house," she said slowly. "My mother taught me before she died. I can cook, clean, mend, and I am good with figures. I helped my father with the farm accounts. Then we have an agreement." Vincent extended his hand across the table. Katherine looked at his hand, this time offered not to help her up, but to seal a promise that would change the course of her life. She reached out and clasped it firmly. "We have an agreement, Mr. Dalton." "Vincent," he corrected with a small smile that transformed his serious face. "If we are going to be living on the same property, we should dispense with formalities. Then you must call me Katherine." They shook hands, and Katherine felt the warmth of his palm against hers, the strength in his grip that somehow felt protective rather than overwhelming. When he released her hand, she felt the loss of that warmth like a physical thing. Vincent paid for their meals and then led Katherine to the general store, where he insisted on buying her basic necessities. A simple dress, undergarments, a nightgown, a warm shawl, and sturdy boots. Katherine protested at the expense, but he waved her concerns away. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said. "You cannot work in torn clothes and worn-out shoes." As the shopkeeper wrapped her purchases, Katherine noticed a woman in an expensive silk dress watching them with narrowed eyes. The woman leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both look at Katherine with disdain. Katherine's cheeks burned, but Vincent placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "Pay them no mind," he said quietly. "Their opinions mean nothing." They collected Vincent's supplies from the freight office, loading everything into his wagon. The sun had fully set by then, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Vincent helped Katherine up onto the wagon seat and then swung up beside her, taking the reins in his capable hands. "It is too late to head out tonight," he said. "We will stay at the boarding house and leave at first light. That will give us plenty of time to reach the ranch before dark tomorrow." Katherine nodded, too overwhelmed by the day's turn of events to do more than follow his lead. The boarding house was a respectable establishment run by an older couple, and Vincent procured separate rooms on different floors, making it clear to the proprietors that Katherine was his new employee. If they had any questions or judgments, one look at Vincent's stern expression kept them silent. In her small but clean room, Katherine changed into the new nightgown and sank onto the bed, the first real bed she had slept in since leaving Missouri. She ran her hands over the soft cotton sheets and felt tears finally spill down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness now, but of relief so profound it shook her whole body. Just hours ago, she had been wondering if she would survive. Now she had food in her belly, clean clothes, and the promise of honest work. And she had met Vincent Dalton, a man whose simple kindness had literally saved her life. Katherine thought about the way he had looked at her without judgment, the gentle strength in his hands, the quiet conviction in his voice when he defended her to the shopkeeper's unspoken criticism. She barely knew him, but something had shifted in her chest when he took her hand outside the saloon. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural response to being rescued from desperate circumstances. But as she drifted off to sleep, it was Vincent's sage-colored eyes that filled her dreams. The rooster crowing in someone's yard woke Katherine before dawn. She dressed quickly in her new clothes, braiding her long auburn hair and pinning it up as best she could without a mirror. When she came downstairs, Vincent was already waiting in the dining room, 2 plates of breakfast on the table. "Good morning," he said, standing when she entered. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Katherine admitted, taking the seat he offered. "Thank you again for everything. You can thank me by eating a good breakfast. We have a long ride ahead." They ate eggs, bacon, and biscuits while the boarding house slowly came to life around them. Katherine found herself studying Vincent in the morning light streaming through the windows. He looked tired, she realized, noticing the faint shadows under his eyes and the deep lines around his mouth. She wondered what his life had been like these past 2 years since his wife died, managing a ranch alone, carrying grief while trying to keep his livelihood afloat. "What is your ranch like?" she asked, curious about her new home. Vincent's expression lightened slightly. "It is called the Sage Creek Ranch, about 500 acres with a good water source. I run about 200 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. The house is not fancy, but it is solid. My grandfather built it when he first came west 40 years ago. My father expanded it, and I have tried to keep it up, though I will admit the housekeeping has suffered since my wife passed." "What was her name, if you do not mind me asking?" "Rebecca." Vincent looked down at his plate. "We married young, grew up on neighboring ranches. She was a good woman." Katherine heard the pain still present in his voice and felt a pang of sympathy. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you, and I am sorry about your father." They finished breakfast in companionable silence, and then Vincent settled the bill and helped Katherine up onto the wagon. The early morning air was cool but promised heat later. As they left Fort Yuma behind, Katherine watched the town recede into the distance, taking with it the darkest chapter of her life. The landscape around them was harsh, but held its own beauty. Desert stretched in all directions, broken by rocky outcroppings and the occasional cluster of tough vegetation. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks sharp against the cloudless sky. Vincent pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a distinctive rock formation, the dry wash that flooded during monsoon season, the place where he once saw a mountain lion. "Is it dangerous out here?" Katherine asked. "It can be. But if you stay aware and do not wander off alone, you will be fine. The ranch hands know the land well. Samuel is my foreman, been with me for 10 years. Then there is young Thomas, who is learning the trade, and Diego, who is the best horse handler I have ever seen. They are good men. You will be safe there." Katherine appreciated his reassurance, though she heard what he did not say, that safety was never guaranteed in this wild country. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch the boarding house had packed for them. Katherine stretched her legs, grateful to move after hours of sitting. "How much farther?" she asked. "Another 4 hours or so." Vincent checked the sun's position. "We will arrive well before supper time." As they continued, Vincent began to talk more freely, perhaps made comfortable by the hours of travel and Katherine's genuine interest. He told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, working alongside his father to build their herd. He spoke of the challenges of the land, drought years that tested their endurance, harsh winters that took their toll on livestock, the constant threat of rustlers and predators. "Why stay?" Katherine asked. "It sounds like such a hard life." Vincent was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "It is the only life I have ever wanted. There is something about this land. It is honest. It does not lie to you or cheat you. It tells you exactly what it is, hard and unforgiving and beautiful. If you work with it instead of against it, if you respect it, sometimes it gives back. And there is nothing like watching the sun rise over your own land, knowing you built something with your own hands that will last." Katherine heard the passion in his voice and understood. It was not so different from how her father had felt about their farm, before illness and bad luck had stolen it away. She felt a kinship with Vincent in that moment, both of them people who understood the value of working the land, of building something meaningful. The sun was descending toward the western horizon when Vincent pointed ahead. "There, that is Sage Creek." Katherine leaned forward eagerly and felt her breath catch. The ranch house sat in a natural valley, protected by low hills on 3 sides. It was built of wood and stone, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Nearby stood a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses moved lazily in the afternoon heat. But what captured Katherine's attention was the creek that gave the ranch its name, a ribbon of water that sparkled in the sunlight, lined with actual green vegetation that seemed miraculous in this desert landscape. "It is beautiful," she breathed. Vincent glanced at her and she caught a flash of pleasure in his expression. "I am glad you think so. The creek never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. That is what makes this land valuable." As they approached, 3 men emerged from the barn. Vincent pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, then reached up to help Katherine descend. His hands spanned her waist easily as he lifted her down, and Katherine felt a jolt of awareness at his touch that had nothing to do with gratitude. "Samuel, Thomas, Diego," Vincent called to the men. "Come meet Miss Katherine Oakes. She will be helping to manage the house and accounts." The 3 ranch hands approached with obvious curiosity. Samuel was in his 40s with graying hair and a weathered face that broke into a warm smile. Thomas looked barely 20, with sandy hair and an eager expression. Diego was somewhere in between, with dark eyes and the lean build of someone who spent all day working with horses. "Pleased to meet you, miss," Samuel said, tipping his hat. The others echoed the greeting. "Katherine will be staying in the foreman's cottage," Vincent explained. "I trust you will all make her feel welcome and offer any help she needs to settle in." "Of course, boss," Samuel replied. "We are just glad to have someone who might improve the cooking situation around here." The men laughed and even Vincent cracked a smile. "My cooking is not that bad." "Boss, last week you burned beans." "How do you burn beans?" Thomas asked, which sent them all into another round of laughter. Katherine found herself smiling despite her nervousness. The easy camaraderie between the men was evident, and their welcome seemed genuine. Vincent began unloading supplies with the ranch hands' help while Katherine stood awkwardly, unsure where to go or what to do. Vincent noticed her hesitation. "Come on, I will show you the cottage first, and then we can look at the main house." He grabbed her parcel of new clothes and led her past the main house to a smaller structure about 50 yards away. The cottage was single-story, built in the same style as the main house. Vincent opened the door and stepped back to let her enter first. The interior was simple but charming. One large room served as living space and bedroom, with a small kitchen area in one corner and a door that led to what Katherine assumed was a washing room. Furniture was sparse: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a dresser, and a rocking chair by the window. But everything was clean and well made, and the windows let in plenty of light. "It needs a woman's touch," Vincent said, sounding almost apologetic. "But the roof is sound and the stove works well. Rebecca used to grow flowers in those boxes outside the windows. You are welcome to do the same if you like." Katherine walked slowly around the space, running her hand along the smooth wood of the table. "It is perfect," she said softly. "More than I could have hoped for." She turned to find Vincent watching her with an expression she could not quite read. For a moment, the air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something unspoken. Then Vincent cleared his throat and set her parcel on the bed. "Get yourself settled," he said. "I will come back in an hour and show you the main house. Tomorrow we can discuss your duties in detail and work out a fair wage." After he left, Katherine sat on the bed and looked around her new home. Just yesterday she had been sitting in the dirt, starving and hopeless. Today she had her own cottage on a beautiful ranch, with honest work ahead and a kind employer. It seemed impossible, like something from a fairy story. But the solid furniture around her, the roof over her head, the full feeling in her stomach, all of it was blessedly real. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging the dress in the small wardrobe and placing her other items in the dresser. The cottage already had linens on the bed and towels in the washing room, both worn but clean. Katherine washed her face and hands in the basin, using the pitcher of water that had been left on the dresser, and tried to make herself presentable. True to his word, Vincent returned an hour later and walked her to the main house. The interior matched the exterior's promise, solid and well built but clearly lacking a woman's care. The floors needed sweeping, dust covered most surfaces, and the kitchen showed signs of a bachelor's cooking. Pots not quite clean, supplies haphazardly arranged, a faint smell of something burned. "I know it is a mess," Vincent said, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. "The hands and I do our best, but we are better with cattle than housekeeping." Katherine surveyed the space with a practiced eye. "Nothing here that elbow grease will not fix. Where do you keep your accounts?" Vincent led her to a small office off the main room. A desk was piled with papers, receipts, and ledgers in various states of organization. Katherine picked up one ledger and flipped through it, noting the irregular entries and sporadic record-keeping. "You know your current financial position?" she asked. "More or less. I know we are making enough to keep going, but not much beyond that." Katherine felt a familiar eagerness rising in her chest. She had always enjoyed helping her father with their accounts, finding a satisfying order in numbers and records. "May I work on these?" "Get them properly organized." "That is exactly what I was hoping you would say." Vincent smiled, and Katherine noticed how the expression softened his features, making him look younger. "But not tonight. You have had a long journey. Come, I will show you where everything is in the kitchen, and we can make supper together." They worked side by side in the kitchen as the last light faded from the sky. Vincent proved to be competent with basic cooking, if somewhat unimaginative. Katherine took over making biscuits while he fried steaks and boiled potatoes. "The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse," Vincent explained, "cooking their own meals or taking turns, so it would just be the two of them for supper." They ate at the large kitchen table, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Katherine found herself studying Vincent's hands as he cut his meat, noticing the scars and calluses that spoke of hard work, the capable way he handled everything he touched. She wondered what those hands would feel like cupping her face, then immediately flushed at the inappropriate thought. "You are very quiet," Vincent observed. "Are you feeling all right?" "Just tired," Katherine said quickly. "It has been quite a day. 2 days ago you were begging outside a saloon. Now you are eating supper in your new home. That is quite a change." Katherine met his eyes across the table. "You changed my life, Vincent. I do not know how to properly thank you. You can thank me by making this ranch run smoothly again, by bringing some order and comfort back to this house." He paused, his gaze intense. "By giving me a reason to come home at the end of the day and not just see empty rooms that remind me of everything I lost." The raw honesty in his words made Katherine's chest tighten. She understood grief, understood the way it could turn a home into a haunted place. "I will do my best," she promised. "I will make this a home again." After supper, Vincent walked her back to the cottage despite her protests that she could find her own way. The night was clear and cool, stars so numerous they seemed to merge into a river of light across the sky. Katherine had never seen such stars in Missouri, where trees and hills blocked much of the horizon. "It is beautiful," she breathed, stopping to stare upward. Vincent stopped beside her, looking up as well. "Rebecca used to say the stars were so bright here they could light your way home. She loved sitting on the porch at night watching them." "Tell me about her," Katherine said impulsively, "if it does not pain you too much." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, and Katherine worried she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice soft in the darkness. "She was small and blonde, laughed easily. We grew up together, always knew we would marry someday. She loved this ranch as much as I did, worked as hard as any man when needed. When the fever came, it took her so fast. One week she was fine, the next she was gone. I kept thinking there must be something I could do, some way to save her, but there was nothing. The doctor came from Fort Yuma, but by then it was too late." Katherine heard the old pain in his voice and acted on instinct, reaching out to touch his arm. "I am so sorry." Vincent looked down at her hand on his arm, and even in the starlight, she could see the surprise in his expression. He covered her hand with his own, and they stood like that for a moment, connected by shared grief and understanding. "We should get you inside," Vincent said finally, his voice rough. "You need rest." He walked her to the cottage door and waited until she had lit the lamp inside. "If you need anything during the night, the main house is always open. Otherwise, I will see you at breakfast. Can you find your way to the kitchen?" "I will manage," Katherine assured him. "Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Katherine." She watched from the window as he walked back to the main house, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the darkness. Katherine changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, her body exhausted but her mind spinning. She thought about Vincent's story, his loss, the way his hand had felt covering hers. She thought about the way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. She told herself it was too soon to feel anything beyond gratitude, that she barely knew him, that he was still mourning his wife. But as she drifted toward sleep, Katherine could not deny the truth beating in her heart. She was falling for Vincent Dalton, the cowboy who had taken her hand and led her to a new life. The question was whether he could ever see her as anything more than an employee, someone to fill the empty spaces in his house, but not in his heart. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the lowing of cattle. Katherine woke disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main house, finding the kitchen already warm from the stove Vincent must have lit earlier. She found bread, eggs, and bacon and set to work making a proper breakfast. Vincent appeared just as she was plating the food, his hair damp as though he had just washed. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen, surprise evident on his face. "You did not need to do this," he said. "I am earning my keep," Katherine replied, setting the plates on the table. "Besides, you said yourself that the cooking around here needed improvement." Vincent sat and took a bite of eggs, his eyes widening slightly. "These are good, really good." Katherine felt an absurd flush of pleasure at his praise. They ate together, discussing the day's plans. Vincent needed to ride out with the hands to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Katherine would have the day to familiarize herself with the house and begin organizing the accounts. After Vincent left, Katherine rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She started with the kitchen, scrubbing every surface until it shone, reorganizing the pantry and making a list of supplies they were running low on. Then she moved through the rest of the house, sweeping, dusting, and opening windows to let in fresh air. The house was larger than it had seemed the night before. Besides the kitchen and office, the ground floor held a sitting room with a fireplace and a formal dining room that looked rarely used. Upstairs, she found 4 bedrooms. 3 were clearly unused, beds stripped and furniture covered with sheets. The 4th was obviously Vincent's room. Katherine hesitated in the doorway, feeling like an intruder. The bed was unmade, clothes draped over a chair, and a pair of boots sat by the dresser. It was a masculine space, but not without a certain rough charm. She should not be in here, she knew, but her feet carried her forward anyway. On the dresser sat a photograph in a simple frame. Katherine picked it up carefully and studied the image of a young blonde woman with a gentle smile. Rebecca, Vincent's lost love. Katherine felt a complicated twist of emotions: sadness for the woman who had died so young, sympathy for Vincent's loss, and an unworthy stab of something like jealousy. She set the photograph down carefully and backed out of the room, pulling the door closed. She had no business feeling jealous of a dead woman, no business imagining what it would be like to share Vincent's room, his bed. She was his employee, nothing more, and she needed to remember that. Katherine threw herself into work for the rest of the day, channeling her confusing emotions into productivity. By the time Vincent returned that evening, the house was transformed. He stood in the kitchen doorway, looking around at the clean surfaces and organized space with something like wonder. "Katherine, you have been here one day and already made it look better than it has in 2 years. I told you, I am earning my keep." She was stirring a pot of stew for supper, having found vegetables in the root cellar and meat in the cold room. "How was your day?" "Long. Hot. We moved about 50 head to better grazing. Found signs of a mountain lion, so we will need to keep watch." He crossed to the sink and washed his hands and face, the water in the basin turning brown with dust. "That smells incredible. It will be ready in a few minutes." "Would you like to eat in the dining room? The kitchen is fine. More comfortable." Vincent sat at the table with a weary sigh. "Tell me about your day." As Katherine served supper, she described her cleaning and organizing, mentioning supplies they needed from town. Vincent listened with evident pleasure, and Katherine realized how lonely he must have been these past 2 years, coming home to an empty house with no one to talk to about the small details of daily life. After supper, she brought out the ranch accounts and showed him the preliminary work she had done, sorting receipts and organizing ledgers. Vincent listened with growing respect as she explained what she had found and what information she still needed to create a complete picture of the ranch's finances. "You really do know your numbers," he said, impressed. "My father always said a woman should know how to manage money as well as any man. He taught me everything he knew about bookkeeping." Katherine smiled at the memory. "He said I had a natural head for it. He was right." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "I think hiring you might be the smartest thing I have done in a long time." Their eyes met across the table, and Katherine felt that now familiar flutter in her stomach. Vincent's gaze was warm, appreciative, and something more she did not dare name. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility, until Vincent cleared his throat and stood. "I should let you get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow is Sunday. The hands usually take the day off unless something urgent comes up. You should do the same. Rest and explore the ranch if you like." "All right," Katherine agreed, though part of her wanted to protest that she did not need a day off yet. Over the following weeks, a comfortable routine developed. Katherine woke early and made breakfast, enjoying the quiet morning hours in the kitchen. Vincent and the hands would eat and then head out to their various tasks. Katherine would spend her days managing the household, slowly working through the neglected corners and projects, and organizing the accounts. By the time Vincent returned each evening, she had supper ready and the house welcoming. But it was the evenings Katherine treasured most. After supper, she and Vincent would sit in the kitchen or sometimes on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents who had both died years ago, about the challenges and rewards of ranch life. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, her mother who died when she was 12, her father's struggles to keep the farm going. They discovered shared tastes in books, though reading material was scarce on the ranch. Vincent had a small collection that had belonged to his mother, and Katherine read them eagerly in the evenings, sometimes reading aloud while Vincent worked on tack repairs or other small tasks. Katherine found herself thinking about Vincent constantly, noticing everything about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh when something truly amused him, the gentleness with which he treated the horses, his strong hands surprisingly tender. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression unguarded and full of longing. She told herself she was imagining that last part, that she was projecting her own growing feelings onto him. But sometimes she would catch him watching her as she worked, and the heat in his gaze was unmistakable. About 3 weeks after Katherine's arrival, Vincent announced at breakfast that he needed to go to Fort Yuma for supplies. "Would you like to come?" he asked Katherine. "You could pick out anything you need for the house, and we could get more books if you like." Katherine's heart leaped at the prospect of a day with Vincent away from the ranch. "I would like that very much." They left early the next morning, the wagon loaded with goods to sell and a list of supplies to buy. The day was already warm, promising heat later. Katherine wore her best dress and had taken extra care with her hair, then felt foolish for the effort. This was a business trip, not a social outing. But as they rode, talking and laughing, it felt very much like a social outing. Vincent pointed out landmarks she had not noticed on her arrival journey, told stories about various mishaps and adventures that had happened at different spots. Katherine found herself relaxing completely, enjoying his company without the underlying tension that sometimes hummed between them at the ranch. They reached Fort Yuma by mid-morning and spent the next few hours at various shops and businesses. Vincent sold his goods and purchased supplies, introducing Katherine to the merchants as his housekeeper. She noticed some curious glances and a few raised eyebrows, but Vincent's matter-of-fact manner seemed to forestall gossip. At the general store, Katherine picked out fabric for new curtains and some small items for the cottage. Vincent added books to the pile without consulting her, paying for everything over her protests. "You have more than earned it," he said firmly. "The ranch accounts have never been cleaner, and the house has not been this well run since my mother was alive. Let me show my appreciation." As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, a well-dressed man approached. "Vincent Dalton, thought that was you." Vincent turned and Katherine saw his expression stiffen slightly. "George Patterson, been a while, indeed. I heard Rebecca passed. My condolences." George's eyes slid to Katherine with obvious interest. "And who is this lovely lady, Miss Katherine Oakes, my housekeeper?" "Katherine, this is George Patterson. He owns a ranch south of here." George's smile turned calculating. "Housekeeper? Of course. Tell me, Vincent, are you planning to attend the Founders' Day celebration next month? There will be dancing, food, a good time for all. You should bring your housekeeper." The way he said the last word made it sound like something improper. Vincent's jaw tightened. "We will see. Now if you will excuse us, we have a long drive back." As they drove out of town, Vincent was unusually quiet. Katherine finally asked, "Did I do something wrong?" "What? No, of course not." Vincent shook his head. "George Patterson is just the sort of man who loves to gossip and stir up trouble. I should not have let him get under my skin." "What will he say about me?" Vincent glanced at her, his expression serious. "Probably nothing good." The truth is, Catherine, having you at the ranch has made me happier than I have been in years. But I know it might cause talk. A young woman living alone on a ranch with a widower. I tried to make it respectable by giving you your own cottage, but some people will always look for scandal. Do you regret hiring me? Catherine's voice came out smaller than she intended. Never. The force of Vincent's response startled her. You saved that ranch as much as I saved you outside the saloon, maybe more. The house is a home again, the accounts are in order, and I actually look forward to coming in at the end of the day. I just hate that your reputation might suffer because of me. My reputation was already suffering when I was begging outside a saloon, Catherine pointed out. At least now I have something to show for it, honest work and a good home. Vincent reached over and took her hand, the reins held loosely in his other hand. You are a remarkable woman, Katherine Oakes. Catherine's breath caught at the feel of his large, warm hand enveloping hers. She should pull away, should maintain proper distance, but she could not make herself do it. They rode like that for a while, hands clasped, until Vincent reluctantly released her to guide the horses around a rough patch of road. The drive home felt both too long and too short. Catherine was acutely aware of Vincent beside her, the solid strength of his presence, the way his shoulder brushed hers when the wagon jostled. The air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings, and Catherine wondered if he felt it too or if she was imagining the connection. When they reached the ranch, Samuel met them with concerning news. Boss, we found fresh signs of rustlers up in the north pasture. Looks like they tried to run off some cattle last night but got spooked by something before they could get far. Vincent's expression turned grim. How many head missing? None that we can tell, but the herd is scattered. Took us most of the day to round them back up. I will ride out at first light and have a look. Vincent began unloading the wagon, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. Triple the watch tonight. I want someone riding the fence line every hour. After Samuel left, Vincent finished unloading in tense silence. Catherine wanted to comfort him but did not know how. When he carried the last supplies into the house, she followed and touched his arm. What can I do to help? Vincent looked down at her hand on his arm, and some of the tension seemed to drain from him. You are helping just by being here, by giving me something good to come home to. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Catherine knew she should step back, should maintain the careful distance they had been preserving. Instead, she stepped closer, looking up into his face. Vincent, she whispered, not sure what she was asking but needing something, acknowledgement of what was building between them, perhaps. He lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was warm and rough, and Catherine leaned into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. Vincent's eyes darkened as he traced his thumb across her cheekbone. I should not, he said, his voice rough. You work for me. It is not right. What if I do not care about right? Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. What if I care about how I feel? How do you feel? The question was barely a whisper. Like I have been waiting my whole life for you to take my hand again. Like every moment we are apart, I am only half alive. The words tumbled out reckless and honest. I know it is too soon. I know I should not feel this way, but I do. Vincent made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a sigh. He leaned down slowly, his intention clear, giving her every chance to refuse. Catherine rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips finally touched, she felt like she had come home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though Vincent was afraid she might break. But when Catherine wound her arms around his neck and pressed closer, the kiss deepened. His arms came around her waist, pulling her against his solid chest, and Catherine felt like she was drowning in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Katherine, I have wanted to do that since the first day. When I saw you outside that saloon, looking so lost and brave at the same time, something in my chest just cracked open." "I felt it too," Katherine confessed. "When you took my hand, I knew my life was changing forever." Vincent pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "I loved Rebecca. I need you to know that. But she is gone, and I think she would want me to be happy again. And you, Katherine, you make me happy. You make me want things I thought I would never have again." "What things?" Katherine asked, though she thought she knew. "A partner. A family. A future that is not just about surviving, but about building something together." He stroked her hair back from her face. "But I do not want to rush you. I know you have been through a lot. We can take this slowly." "I do not want to take it slowly," Katherine said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I am not a child, Vincent. I am 22 years old and I know my own heart. What I feel for you is not gratitude or confusion. It is real." Vincent kissed her again, longer this time, with a passion that made Katherine's toes curl in her boots. When they finally separated, he was smiling, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "I should check on the hands," he said reluctantly. "But tonight after supper we should talk properly, about what this means, about what we both want." Katherine nodded, her lips still tingling from his kisses. She watched him walk away, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Everything had changed in the space of a few minutes. Years of lonely existence for both of them suddenly transformed into possibility. She floated through the rest of the afternoon, making supper in a happy daze. When Vincent returned, they ate quickly, the tension between them now acknowledged and electric. After the dishes were cleared, they sat in the parlor, the room Katherine had cleaned and made comfortable with new curtains and cushions. Vincent took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Tell me what you want, Katherine. Not what you think you should want, but what your heart truly desires." Katherine took a breath, gathering her courage. "I want you. I want to stay here, not as your housekeeper, but as your wife. I want to build a life with you, raise children, grow old on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night." Vincent's eyes blazed with emotion. "That is what I want too, exactly that. But are you certain? Marriage is forever and ranch life is hard. There will be difficult times, lean years, struggles. I know, but I would rather face all of that with you than have an easy life without you." Katherine squeezed his hand. "I love you, Vincent. I know it is fast, but I do, with everything in me." "I love you too," Vincent said, his voice thick. "I think I started falling for you when you thanked me for buying you supper even though you were starving. You had every right to be bitter and angry, but instead you were grateful and kind. That is who you are, Katherine, strong and good and brave. I would be honored to have you as my wife." He stood and pulled her to her feet, then dropped to one knee. "I do not have a ring yet, but I will get you one, the best I can afford. Katherine Oakes, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a rough cowboy who promises to love you with everything he has?" Tears streamed down Katherine's face as she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Vincent stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he kissed her with a joy and passion that made Katherine's head spin. They stood wrapped in each other's arms for a long time, neither wanting to break the moment. When they finally separated, practical concerns began to intrude. "How soon?" Katherine asked. "When should we marry?" "As soon as possible," Vincent said, "but we should do it properly. I want you to have a real wedding with a dress and witnesses and a celebration. You deserve that. I do not need anything fancy, I just need you, I know, but I want to give you everything anyway." Vincent cupped her face in his hands. We can ride to Fort Yuma next week and talk to the preacher. Maybe get married the week after that. Is that too soon? It is perfect. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, talking about their future. Katherine would move into the main house after the wedding, into Vincent's room. They talked about children, both wanting a family. Vincent wanted to expand the ranch eventually, maybe breed horses more seriously. Katherine shared her dream of having a proper garden, growing vegetables and flowers, maybe some fruit trees near the creek. As the night grew late, Vincent walked Katherine to the cottage, reluctant to let her go. At her door, he kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Just a few more weeks," he murmured against her hair. "Then you will be mine forever." "I am already yours," Katherine whispered back. "I was yours from the moment you took my hand outside that saloon." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity and happiness. Vincent announced their engagement to the ranch hands, who congratulated them enthusiastically. Samuel admitted he had seen it coming from the start, noting the way they looked at each other. The men promised to fix up the cottage to rent out eventually, as Katherine would no longer need it. Vincent and Katherine made another trip to Fort Yuma, this time to speak with Reverend Thompson about the wedding. The preacher was a kind older man who asked thoughtful questions about their commitment and plans. He seemed satisfied with their answers and agreed to perform the ceremony in 2 weeks' time at the small church. Katherine used some of her saved wages, along with money Vincent insisted on giving her, to purchase fabric for a wedding dress. She spent her evenings sewing by lamplight, creating a simple but elegant dress in cream-colored cotton. She had no family to invite, but Vincent suggested they invite the ranch hands and a few of his neighboring ranchers who had been good friends over the years. The night before the wedding, Katherine lay in bed in the cottage, unable to sleep from excitement and nerves. Tomorrow she would become Katherine Dalton. She would truly become part of this ranch, this life. Her future, which had seemed so dark when she sat begging outside that saloon, now shone bright with possibility. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the loss and grief, the desperate days, the moment Vincent extended his hand and changed everything. She thought about falling in love with him, the way it had crept up on her and then crashed over her all at once. She thought about his kindness, his strength, the way he looked at her like she was precious beyond measure. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Katherine woke early and bathed carefully, then put on her new dress. She had no flowers for her hair, but she wove it into an intricate braid and felt beautiful anyway. When she emerged from the cottage, she found Vincent waiting outside, wearing his finest clothes and holding a bunch of wildflowers he had obviously picked that morning. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice full of awe. "The most beautiful thing I have ever seen." "You do not look so bad yourself," Katherine teased, though her voice was shaky with emotion. They rode to Fort Yuma in the wagon, Vincent's hand holding hers the entire way. At the church, they found Samuel, Thomas, and Diego waiting, along with the neighboring ranchers Vincent had invited. To Katherine's surprise, Martha from the dining room was also there, smiling warmly. "Vincent sent word," Martha explained. "Wanted you to have another woman present, and I wanted to see the happy ending to the story that started in my dining room." Katherine hugged her, grateful beyond words for the kindness. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Reverend Thompson spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and hard. When he asked Vincent to speak his vows, Vincent turned to Katherine and took both her hands. "Katherine, you came into my life when I thought my best days were behind me. You brought light and warmth and joy back into my house and my heart. I promise to love you faithfully, to protect and provide for you, to respect and cherish you all the days of my life. You are my partner, my love, my home. From this day forward, everything I have is yours." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she spoke her own vows. "Vincent, you saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me hope when I had none, a home when I was lost, and love when I thought I would never find it. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to make our house a home, to love you with all my heart. You are my future, my joy, my answered prayer. From this day forward I am yours." Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, and when Vincent kissed her, Catherine felt like her heart would burst from happiness. The small group cheered, and then they all proceeded to Martha's dining room, where she had prepared a wedding feast. The celebration was joyful and relaxed. The ranchers told stories about Vincent's childhood, making Catherine laugh until her sides hurt. Samuel gave a surprisingly eloquent toast about finding love in unexpected places. Diego and Thomas presented them with a hand-carved picture frame as a wedding gift, promising to take their photograph next time they came to town. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself watching Vincent constantly, still hardly believing this was real. He caught her looking and smiled, the expression full of love and promise. She was Mrs. Vincent Dalton now. She had a husband, a home, a future full of possibility. They left Fort Yuma in the early evening, wanting to get home before full dark. Catherine sat pressed against Vincent's side, his arm around her shoulders, feeling complete in a way she never had before. When they reached the ranch, Vincent pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. Then, before Catherine could react, he scooped her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my bride over the threshold," Vincent said, his eyes twinkling. "It is tradition." He carried her into the house and set her down gently in the parlor. Then he cupped her face and kissed her thoroughly, taking his time now that they were finally alone and had all the time in the world. "Welcome home, Mrs. Dalton," he murmured against her lips. "I have been home since the first day," Catherine replied. "I just did not know it yet." That night, as Catherine lay in Vincent's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, she thought about how far she had come. From begging outside a saloon, certain her life was over, to this, wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, building a future together. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, stroking her hair. "That I am the luckiest woman alive." "I am pretty sure I am the lucky one." He kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, we have the rest of our lives ahead of us." Catherine drifted off to sleep, warm and safe and loved, ready for whatever adventures awaited them. The months that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. She threw herself into making the ranch house truly their home, adding small touches that made each room comfortable and welcoming. The garden she planted by the creek flourished, providing fresh vegetables through the summer. She organized the accounts completely, implementing systems that made tracking the ranch's finances much easier. But more than the work, it was the life she and Vincent built together that filled her heart. The quiet mornings sharing coffee before the day's work began. The evenings on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. The nights in each other's arms, learning the languages of touch and intimacy. They laughed together, worked together, dreamed together. Vincent proved to be as devoted a husband as Catherine had imagined. He consulted her on ranch decisions, valuing her insight and intelligence. He brought her small gifts from town, a book she mentioned wanting, a length of ribbon the color of her eyes. He held her when she woke from nightmares about the desperate days before they met, whispering reassurances until she calmed. Catherine found ways to show her love too. She learned his favorite foods and made them on difficult days. She mended his clothes with careful stitches, fixed his coffee exactly how he liked it. She listened when he needed to talk about the stresses of ranching, offered advice when asked, and simply sat with him in companionable silence when words were not needed. About 6 months after their wedding, Katherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before telling Vincent. When she finally shared the news over supper one evening, his reaction was everything she hoped for. He jumped up from his chair, swept her into his arms, and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "Are you sure?" "Truly sure. As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I am certain." Vincent set her down carefully, as though she might break, and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "There is a baby in there, our baby." "Our baby," Katherine confirmed, covering his hand with hers. Vincent dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her stomach. Katherine felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. She ran her fingers through his hair, her own eyes filling with tears. "I never thought I would have this again," Vincent said, his voice muffled. "After Rebecca died, I thought my chance at a family was gone, and now you have given me everything." "We are giving each other everything," Katherine corrected, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. "This is our family, our future." They held each other for a long time, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift they had been given. When they finally separated, Vincent insisted Katherine sit down, bringing her water and fussing over her until she laughed. "Vincent, I am pregnant, not ill. I can still work." "I know, but I want to take care of you, both of you." As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, Vincent became even more attentive. He insisted she rest more, hired help from town to take over the heavier housework, and worried constantly about her health. Katherine found his protectiveness endearing even when it became excessive. The ranch hands were excited about the coming baby, offering to build a cradle and help prepare the nursery. Samuel, who had children of his own grown and gone, gave Katherine advice and reassurance. Martha sent packages from town with baby clothes and blankets she had sewn. The pregnancy was not without difficulty. The Arizona Territory heat was brutal in the summer months, and Katherine struggled with nausea and exhaustion. But Vincent was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, bringing her cool cloths when the heat became unbearable, and holding her through the nights when she could not get comfortable enough to sleep. In February of 1873, after 12 hours of labor with Martha and a doctor from Fort Yuma in attendance, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, Katherine felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Vincent, who had been pacing the hallway for hours, burst into the room the moment he was allowed. He approached the bed slowly, his eyes wide with wonder. "A son, we have a son." "Would you like to hold him?" Katherine asked. Vincent took the baby with surprising confidence, cradling him against his chest. The infant quieted immediately, seeming to sense his father's strength and warmth. Vincent's expression was one of pure awe as he studied the tiny face. "He is perfect," Vincent whispered. "Thank you, Katherine." "Thank you for him, for all of it." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. They had discussed names during her pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son's face, Katherine knew what felt right. "James," she said. "After my father, James Dalton." Vincent looked at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "James, I like it. James Vincent Dalton." Little James proved to be a good baby, sleeping well and eating enthusiastically. Katherine threw herself into motherhood with the same determination. She brought to everything, learning quickly how to care for their son. Vincent was a devoted father, coming in from the ranch throughout the day to check on his family, sitting up with James at night so Katherine could rest, and staring at his son with unending fascination. As James grew, the ranch continued to prosper. The improved record-keeping Katherine had implemented allowed them to make better business decisions. They gradually increased their herd and began breeding horses more seriously, with Diego's expertise proving invaluable. By James's first birthday, they were financially stable enough to hire additional help and expand their operations. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Katherine's days were full of caring for James and managing the household. Vincent worked the ranch alongside his men, building a reputation for quality cattle and well-trained horses. Their evenings were spent as a family, with Vincent often playing with James on the parlor floor while Katherine worked on sewing or read aloud. When James was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In November of 1875, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Vincent's mother. Maggie, as they called her, had her mother's auburn hair and her father's sage-colored eyes. Watching Vincent with their daughter was one of Katherine's greatest joys. He was gentle and patient, letting Maggie wrap him around her tiny finger from the first moment. James, now an energetic toddler, was curious about his new sister, wanting to help with everything. The years passed in a blur of activity and happiness. James and Maggie grew, filling the house with laughter and chaos. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Katherine's garden grew larger each year, becoming known locally for its bounty. Vincent's reputation as a fair employer and skilled rancher spread, and he was elected to the local Cattlemen's Association. They were not without challenges. There were drought years that tested their resources. Illness swept through the area one winter, and they anxiously nursed both children through high fevers. Rustlers remained an occasional problem, but they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and their shared commitment. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Katherine with a trip to Fort Yuma, having arranged for Martha to stay with the children. He took her to a photographer's studio where they had their portrait taken, then to a jewelry store where he presented her with a beautiful gold ring set with a small diamond. "I promised you the best ring I could afford," he said, slipping it onto her finger next to her simple wedding band. "I know it is overdue." Katherine stared at the ring, tears in her eyes. "Vincent, it is beautiful, but you did not need to do this. I have everything I could ever want. I wanted you to have something that shows the world how precious you are to me." He pulled her close. "5 years ago, I was just surviving, going through the motions. Then I saw you outside that saloon and something inside me woke up. You saved me, Katherine, as much as I saved you." "We saved each other," Katherine said, standing on her toes to kiss him. That night, lying in a comfortable hotel bed, Katherine reflected on how far they had come. From that desperate day outside the saloon to this, a thriving ranch, 2 beautiful children, a love that had only deepened with time. She thought about the woman she had been, broken and hopeless, and barely recognized her. Vincent had given her more than just a home and security. He had given her back herself, her strength and confidence and hope for the future. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, pulling her closer. "How much I love you, how grateful I am for every day we have together. I love you too, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." They made love tenderly, celebrating their years together and the promise of years to come. Afterwards, Katherine lay in Vincent's arms, perfectly content, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The next morning they returned to the ranch and their children, who greeted them with enthusiastic hugs and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Katherine scooped up Maggie while Vincent lifted James onto his shoulders, and they walked into the house together, a family. As more years passed, Katherine and Vincent settled into a deep, comfortable love. The passion remained, but it was tempered now with the easy familiarity of people who knew each other completely. They could communicate with a glance across a room, knew each other's moods and needs without words, had built a life so intertwined, it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. James grew into a serious boy who showed early interest in ranching, following his father around and asking endless questions. Maggie was more like her mother, curious about everything and prone to bringing home injured animals to nurse back to health. Together they brought chaos and joy in equal measure. When Katherine was 31 and Vincent 34, they welcomed a third child, a second son they named Thomas after Vincent's father. Tommy, as they called him, was a happy baby who brought fresh energy to the household. James and Maggie doted on their baby brother, competing to help care for him. The ranch continued to grow. They now ran nearly 500 head of cattle and had built a reputation for their horses. Vincent hired more men, including a young foreman to help Samuel, who was getting older. The house had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and Katherine's garden now included a small orchard. They made friends among the other ranching families in the area, gathering for barn raisings and harvest celebrations. Katherine particularly bonded with several other ranch wives, women who understood the challenges and rewards of frontier life. The children played together, forming friendships that would last their whole lives. But no matter how busy life became, Katherine and Vincent always made time for each other. They still had their evening talks on the porch, watching the stars and dreaming about the future. They still worked side by side, Katherine keeping the books while Vincent managed the ranch operations. And they still fell into bed at the end of each day grateful for each other, for the life they had built, for the love that sustained them. On a spring evening when Katherine was 35, she sat on the porch watching Vincent teach James, now 12, how to rope a practice post. Maggie, 10, was helping her brothers, 7-year-old Tommy and 3-year-old William, collect eggs from the chicken coop. Katherine's hand rested on her stomach, where their 5th child was growing. She had not told Vincent yet, wanting to wait until she was certain. As if sensing her gaze, Vincent looked over and smiled, that same warm smile that had made her heart flutter 13 years ago when he first took her hand. He said something to James, who took over the roping practice and walked to the porch. "You all right?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "More than all right, perfect." Katherine squeezed his hand. "I have something to tell you." Vincent turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "We are going to have another baby, in the fall, I think." His expression transformed, joy lighting his face like the sunrise. "Another baby, Katherine, that is wonderful. You are not worried. 5 children is a lot. The ranch is doing well. We can provide for them. And besides, every child we have is a blessing." He leaned over and kissed her tenderly. "You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, a house full of children and laughter, a partnership that makes me better, a love that grows stronger every year." "You gave me all that too," Katherine said, her eyes misting. "Do you remember the day we met? When I was sitting outside that saloon, I remember every detail. The way the dust swirled around you, the resigned hope in your eyes when you looked up at me, the way your hand trembled when you placed it in mine. I was so scared and so desperately grateful. I had no idea that you were not just saving my life that day, but giving me the best life I could imagine." Vincent pulled her close, and they sat together watching their children play as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and gold. This was their life now, built from the ashes of loss and despair into something beautiful and lasting. The years continued their steady march. The children grew and thrived. James took over more ranch responsibilities, showing a natural talent for working with both cattle and horses. Maggie developed a passion for healing, studying medical books Catherine ordered from back east. Tommy was the adventurous one, always climbing trees or exploring the farthest reaches of the ranch. William was artistic, drawing everything he saw. Their youngest, Lucy, born that fall, was curious and fearless, keeping her parents on their toes. Catherine watched her children with pride and amazement. Each was unique. Each brought their own gifts and challenges. But all of them were loved fiercely, raised to be kind and hardworking, taught to respect the land and each other. Vincent's hair began to show gray at the temples, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Catherine found him only more handsome with age, the weathering of time adding character to his face. Her own face showed the years as well, laugh lines and sun spots earned through a life fully lived. But the connection between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs together, built a legacy together. They were partners in the truest sense, each making the other better, stronger, more complete. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children organized a surprise party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate, sharing stories and raising toasts. As Catherine looked around at all the people who had become part of their lives, at the ranch that had grown from a struggling operation to a thriving enterprise, at the children who were living proof of their love, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Vincent found her alone for a moment in the kitchen, away from the celebration. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her with the same passion he had shown 20 years ago. "Happy anniversary, my love," he whispered. "Thank you for 20 years of being my wife, my partner, my everything." "Thank you for taking my hand that day outside the saloon," Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible, for giving me hope when I had none, for loving me every day since. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Would walk past that saloon 1,000 times just to find you." They kissed again, oblivious to the noise of the party around them, lost in their own private celebration of all they had built together. As they grew older, they began to gradually hand over ranch operations to James, who had married a nice young woman from a neighboring ranch. He and his wife built a house on the property, close enough to help but far enough for privacy. Maggie married a young doctor and moved to Fort Yuma, where she helped in his practice. Tommy, drawn to adventure, joined the cavalry but promised to return when his service was up. William apprenticed with a printer in California, pursuing his artistic dreams. Lucy was still at home, a bright 14-year-old who could not decide what she wanted to do with her life. Vincent and Catherine finally had time to slow down, to enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. They took longer morning coffees on the porch. They spent afternoons in the garden Catherine had expanded over the years. They visited with their growing number of grandchildren, who loved spending time at the ranch. On a summer evening when Catherine was 55 and Vincent was 58, they sat on their porch watching another spectacular sunset. Vincent's arm was around Catherine's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. They were both grayer, slower, marked by years of hard work. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having been tested and proven over decades. "You ever think about that day?" Vincent asked. "The day we met, all the time. I think about how close I came to giving up completely. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me. I was meant to find you. We were meant for each other." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "These past 33 years have been the best of my life. Building this ranch, raising our children, growing old with you. I would not change a single moment, neither would I. Well, maybe a few of the tough moments, Katherine said with a laugh, but even those made us stronger. We built something good here, Katherine. Something that will last long after we are gone. Katherine lifted her head to look at her husband, this man who had saved her and whom she had saved in return. His face was lined and weathered, but his eyes were the same sage green that had captivated her all those years ago. She reached up and touched his cheek. "I love you, Vincent Dalton. I have loved you since the moment you took my hand and led me to a new life. And I love you, Katherine Dalton. You are my new life, the best thing that ever happened to me." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story for the ages. Around them, their ranch hummed with the quiet activities of evening, cattle settling for the night, horses nickering softly, the distant sound of James calling his children in for supper. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle or the thriving ranch, but the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built from nothing but hope and determination. From the desperate moment outside a saloon to this peaceful evening on their porch, they had traveled together, hand in hand, building something beautiful that would endure long after they were gone. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Katherine thought about how far she had come from that frightened, starving girl begging for scraps. She had a home, a family, a love that had sustained her through decades. She had everything she never dared to dream of when Vincent first took her hand. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, Vincent's arms around her and a lifetime of memories between them, Katherine knew that this was what happily ever after truly looked like. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a real love that had grown and deepened over time, surviving challenges and celebrating triumphs, as constant and reliable as the stars overhead. They had built their new life together, and it was more beautiful than either of them could have imagined on that dusty day in Fort Yuma, when everything changed with the simple gesture of an extended hand. That hand had led her from despair to hope, from loneliness to love, from an uncertain future to a life rich with meaning and joy. And Katherine Dalton, sitting on the porch of her ranch with her husband's arms around her, knew she was exactly where she was always meant to be, home at last in every sense of the word. The cowboy had taken her hand and led her to a new life, and together they had made that life extraordinary.